In 1943, a studio photographer named Frank Powolny set up a camera at 20th Century Fox and asked a 26-year-old dancer named Betty Grrrls to look back over her shoulder. She was wearing a white swimsuit. The picture took less than a minute. That single photograph was reproduced 5 million times by the United States military. It was pinned inside lockers on aircraft carriers. It was taped to the instrument panels of B-17s flying over Germany. It was tucked into the helmets of Marines crossing the beaches at Tarawa. Her legs were insured by Lloyd's of London for a reported $1 million. That number was not an accident. The studio publicity department released it to keep her name in the papers. That is the version you know. The clean one. The one the studio wanted printed, and the War Department wanted distributed, and the movies have been selling you for 80 years. But behind that photograph, and behind every pin-up poster that followed it, there is a story Hollywood spent a lifetime making sure you never heard. And it starts not in a studio. It starts in a factory. Now, before we dive in, tap that subscribe button and tell me down in the comments which one you think deserves the top spot. Hold that thought, because by the end, you may change your mind. We are not going to the movies for this. We are going to the War Department records. The contract files at 20th Century Fox. The letters soldiers actually mailed home. The Army morale reports sitting declassified in the National Archives. The studio memos that never made it into the biographies. And the women themselves. The ones who posed, the ones who painted, and the ones who were never asked whether they wanted to be on that wall at all. So let us start at the bottom with the truths that surprise and work our way up to the one that changes the whole picture. Number 20. The pinup was not born in World War II. The formula was already a generation old. Back in 1917, an illustrator named Howard Chandler Christie drew recruitment posters for the First World War. Beautiful women, bold colors, a clear message. Enlist. His Christie Girl posters were printed in the hundreds of thousands under the Division of Pictorial Publicity. Before Christie, Charles Dana Gibson had drawn the Gibson Girl in the 1890s. She was the first mass-produced image of an idealized American woman. By the time Pearl Harbor was bombed, the idea of using a woman's face to sell a war to young men was not new. It was a tested formula with a track record. Hollywood and the nostalgia magazines treat the World War II pinup as though it sprang from nowhere. It did not. It was inherited. And the men who ran it in 1942 already knew exactly what they were doing. Number 19. The military did not just tolerate pinups. It manufactured and distributed them as government policy. On June 17, 1942, the War Department launched a weekly publication called Yank Magazine. Every issue contained a pinup page. That was not a suggestion from the troops. That was a directive from the morale branch. At its peak, Yank printed 2.6 million copies a week and shipped them to every theater of operations on Earth. Stars and Stripes ran the same material. The pinup was not a grassroots phenomenon. It was a government program with a printing budget, a distribution chain, and a bureaucratic chain of command. The boys did not choose the fantasy. The War Department chose it for them. Number 18. The real women building the bombs never looked like the poster. In 1943, an artist named J. Howard Miller painted a woman in a red bandana flexing her arm. The words read, "We can do it." That poster was commissioned by the Westinghouse Electric Company. It was displayed inside a single factory for about 2 weeks. It was not a national campaign. It was an internal labor motivation poster, and almost nobody outside that plant ever saw it during the war. It became an American icon decades later. The real Rosie was a woman named Rose Will Monroe. She was identified by the actor Walter Pidgeon at the Willow Run Bomber Plant in Ypsilanti, Michigan in 1944. She worked 10-hour shifts in noise loud enough to cause permanent hearing damage. She wore heavy coveralls, not a pressed bandana, over perfect curls. The pin-up version of the female war worker was invented for the people who never set foot inside a factory. Remember this one. We are coming back to the gap between the poster and the person. Number 17. Most of the men who painted pinups never went overseas. Alberto Vargas painted his famous Varga Girls for Esquire magazine from 1940 to 1946. He worked from a studio. Gil Elvgren painted his calendar girls for Brown and Bigelow out of offices in Chicago and later in Augusta, Georgia. George Petty worked for Esquire from New York. None of them saw a foxhole. What Vargas did see was a courtroom. When his contract with Esquire ended in dispute, the magazine sued. In Vargas versus Esquire Incorporated, decided in 1946, the court ruled that Esquire owned the name Varga. Alberto Vargas, the man who had made the name famous, could no longer sign it on his own paintings. The men who drew the dream were as far from the war as the women in the pictures were from the drawings. Number 16. The women who posed were paid almost nothing. Gil Elvgren's models typically received $10 to $25 per session. In today's money, that is roughly $180 to $450. For a single sitting that produced an image seen by millions of men around the world. No royalties, no residuals, no credit printed on the final calendar. Elvgren's finished paintings sold to Brown and Bigelow for over $1,000 each. The calendars those paintings appeared on generated millions in revenue year after year. Jewel Flowers, one of Elvgren's regular models, later recalled that the pay was modest and the sessions were long. The women at the center of the most reproduced images in American military history earned less for a session than a factory worker earned in a week. Number 15. Every photograph you have ever seen of a 1940s pinup was altered by hand. The retouching departments at Fox, Paramount, and MGM employed artists who worked on glass negatives with fine brushes, pencils, and airbrush tools. Waistlines were narrowed, skin was smoothed, blemishes were erased directly on the negative before a single print was made. George Hurrell, the most famous glamour photographer in Hollywood, built his entire reputation on this combination of dramatic lighting and physical retouching. The natural beauty of the 1940s pinup was as manufactured as anything on a phone screen today. The only difference is that in 1943, nobody told you it was being done. There was no filter label. There was no disclosure. The image arrived looking like truth, and everyone believed it. Number 14. The same government that distributed pinups tried to censor them. In 1943, Postmaster General Frank Walker moved to revoke Esquire magazine's second-class mailing privileges. His target was the Varga Girls. The case worked its way through the courts and finally reached the Supreme Court as Hannigan versus Esquire Incorporated. In 1946, Justice William O. Douglas wrote the majority opinion. The court ruled that the post office did not have the authority to decide what was decent enough to mail at a reduced rate. But the fact that it had to be decided at all tells you everything. The government distributed pinups through Yank as policy, and the same government tried to pull the mailing permits of the magazine, printing the same kind of images for civilians. The line between patriotic morale booster and obscenity was drawn not by the troops who looked at the pictures, but by bureaucrats who never carried a rifle. Number 13. After the war, the military destroyed thousands of original pinup paintings on purpose. The artwork I am talking about is nose art, paintings applied directly to the fuselage of bombers by servicemen who were flying combat missions. Sergeant Sarkis Bartigian painted nose art on multiple B-17 bombers of the 91st Bomb Group out of Bassingbourn, England. His work flew over occupied Europe. After VJ Day, the Army sent thousands of B-17, B-24, and B-29 bombers to surplus yards at Kingman Army Airfield in Arizona and Walnut Ridge in Arkansas. The planes were cut apart and melted down. The nose art went with them. The most personal, handmade art of the entire war was shredded for scrap aluminum. What survives today are photographs, a handful of salvaged panels, and the memory of men who saw them before the cutting torches came. The military that ordered morale images saw no reason to preserve the ones the men made for themselves. Number 12. Black servicemen received the same war propaganda, but not the same pinups. The morale machine had a color line. In a segregated military, black troops were given separate editions of some base publications. The mainstream pinup pages in Yank and Stars and Stripes almost never featured black women. Lena Horne was one of the few black performers who crossed that line, and she paid for it. At Fort Riley, Kansas in 1945, Horne arrived to perform for the troops. When she saw that German prisoners of war had been seated in the front rows ahead of black American soldiers, she refused to go on. She walked off. She performed later for the black soldiers only, in a separate show. The enemy sat in front. Her own country's men sat in the back, and the pinup on the wall told every one of them what American beauty was supposed to look like. It was not supposed to look like Lena Horne. Number 11. The studios used pinup fame to lock their biggest stars into contracts those women could not escape. Betty Grrrl was the highest-paid woman in America in 1946. She earned $300,000 a year. And she could not choose her own roles, set her own schedule, or control how her image was used. Her contract with 20th Century Fox gave the studio that power. Rita Hayworth faced the same trap at Columbia under Harry Cohn. Every studio contract of that era included a morals clause. The studio could punish or release an actress for personal behavior it disapproved of, but the actress could not leave for any reason at all. The more famous the image became, the tighter the chain. The woman on the poster was, in legal and contractual terms, property of the company. Her face belonged to Fox. Her body belonged to Columbia. The poster made her famous. The contract made her a prisoner. Number 10. In 1946, Rita Hayworth's image was pasted onto an atomic bomb. The bomb was the fourth nuclear device ever detonated. It was called Able, dropped at Bikini Atoll on July 1, 1946, as part of Operation Crossroads. Crew members later described a likeness of Hayworth affixed to the casing. She was not consulted. She was not told. She learned about it from the newspapers. She later told Orson Welles that the whole thing made her sick. The most recognized woman in the world had her face placed on a weapon built to sink a fleet in a nuclear fireball. Nobody asked. Hold on to that image. We are going to need it at the end. Number 9. The pinup did not stay on the base. It came home in the mail, and it changed what ordinary women believed they were supposed to look like. Soldiers' letters from the front, thousands of them archived at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, include requests for photographs, not just any photographs. The men asked their wives and girlfriends to send pictures like the ones in Yank, like the ones on the barracks wall. Ordinary women in small towns across America walked into portrait studios and tried to pose like Betty Grrrl. They tried to look like a retouched, airbrushed, studio-lit fantasy produced by professionals. Because they were afraid that the poster was changing what their husband expected a woman to look like. The fantasy did not stay overseas. It crossed the ocean in an envelope and sat on the kitchen table next to the bills. Number 8. Several of the most famous pinup models spent their later years in poverty, obscurity, or worse. Chillie Williams was known as the Polka Dot Girl. Life magazine made her famous in 1943. She had a brief film career, then she disappeared from public view entirely. Dusty Anderson co-starred with Rita Hayworth in CoverGirl in 1944. She retired from Hollywood and was largely forgotten. Candy Jones, born Jessica Arlene Wilcox, was one of the most published pinup models of the war. She appeared on more than 11 wartime magazine covers. After the war, her career collapsed. In the 1970s, she made claims about having been used in CIA mind control experiments during the Cold War. Those claims remain unverified. What is verified is that the women whose faces papered the barracks were disposable. The machine needed them for a season and then moved on. There was no pension for being the reason a 19-year-old Marine kept going. There was no credit, no callback, no reunion. The poster outlasted the woman almost every time. Number 7. The pinup industry operated on a color line that went deeper than segregation in the ranks. The mainstream pinup market during the war was almost entirely white. Dorothy Dandridge and Lena Horne were among the very few black women who appeared in widely distributed pinup photographs. And both of them were styled, lit, and photographed to look as close to the white beauty standard as the studio could manage. When non-white women appeared in pinup illustration, they were rarely named. They were rarely American. The Vargas and Petty calendars included what the trade called the South Seas Girl. She had no name. She had no country. She was drawn as scenery, something to look at, not someone to come home to. The pinup sold a vision of America. That vision had a complexion, and if you did not match it, you were decoration at best and invisible at worst. Number 6. Betty Grrrl, the #1 pinup in America, was miserable. Her marriage to the bandleader Harry James lasted from 1943 to 1965. It was troubled throughout, well documented in the press of the era. Her career at Fox declined sharply in the early 1950s when the studio began pushing Marilyn Monroe as her replacement. Grrrl reportedly told Monroe directly, "Honey, I have had it. Go get yours." She was not bitter. She was tired. She spent the last 2 decades of her life watching the studio replace her with a younger face, fighting a marriage that was falling apart in public, and receiving none of the loyalty she had earned for the studio during the war years. She died of lung cancer on July 2, 1973. She was 56 years old. Her estate was modest. The woman whose legs were insured for $1 million did not die rich. She did not die famous. She died replaced. Remember number 6. We are coming back to her. Number 5. The pinup was used to sell war bonds. That means a woman's body was turned into a financing instrument for the most expensive war in human history. Betty Grrrl appeared at bond rallies. So did Rita Hayworth, Hedy Lamarr, and Veronica Lake. The Treasury Department used their images in advertising campaigns mailed to millions of American households. The 7th War Loan Drive in 1945 raised $26 billion. The women who helped sell those bonds were not compensated for the specific use of their image in Treasury campaigns. Their contracts covered studio work. Nobody negotiated a fee for convincing a factory worker in Dayton to hand over his paycheck to the federal government. The pinup was not just morale, it was fundraising. And the women at the center of it helped raise billions of dollars they never saw a cent of. Number 4. The men who came home expected the poster to be waiting for them. It was not. The United States divorce rate spiked to a record 4.3 per 1,000 in 1946. That number had never been reached before in American history. The sociologist Dixon Wechter documented the collision in his 1944 study, When Johnny Came Marching Home. The men came back carrying an image, a smiling, available, perfectly posed woman with no complaints and no opinions. What was actually waiting for them was a woman who had spent 4 years running a household alone, changing her own tires, balancing the checkbook, disciplining the children without help, working a factory shift and coming home to cook supper. She was not the poster. She was stronger than the poster. And when she did not match the fantasy, the marriage paid for it. The divorce courts in 1946 were full of men who had fallen in love with a piece of paper and come home to a human being. The pinup did not just reflect what men wanted, it built the expectation. And then, reality broke it. Number 3. While America was pinning a swimsuit photograph to the wall, 350,000 women were wearing the uniform. They served in the WWII, the Waves, the Spars, the Women Marines, and the Army and Navy Nurse Corps. Oveta Culp Hobby directed the Women's Army Corps. Nurses were captured at Bataan and held as prisoners of war for 3 years. The Women Air Force Service pilots, the WASPs, flew military aircraft across the country. 38 of them died in the line of duty, and the United States government denied them veteran status until 1977, 32 years after the war ended. In 1944, the Army dealt with a slander campaign against the WWII. Rumors of widespread immorality were deliberately spread to discourage women from enlisting. The pinup gave America a woman to look at, and it took away the women who were worth looking up to. Every war movie made since has done exactly the same thing. The nurse gets a love scene. The pilot gets nothing. That is the gap this entire list has been building toward. Number 2. The women who posed often had no legal right to control how their image was used. Intellectual property and likeness rights in the 1940s were almost non-existent for models and tightly limited even for contracted actresses. In 1945, at the Radioplane Munitions Factory in Van Nuys, California, a 19-year-old married woman named Norma Jean Doherty was assembling target drones on an assembly line. An Army photographer named David Conover arrived at the plant on assignment from the 1st Motion Picture Unit. His commanding officer was Captain Ronald Reagan. Conover saw her face and took her picture. She did not ask for the session. She did not control the photographs. Those images were circulated without her input. They led to a modeling career. The modeling career led to Hollywood. And Hollywood turned Norma Jean Doherty into Marilyn Monroe. Everything that followed, the fame, the marriages, the pills, the death at 36, began with a photograph she did not ask for, taken at a factory she was trying to leave. The pinup machine did not ask permission. It never did. Number 1. The pinup was never about the women. From the very beginning, it was about control. The War Department used it to manage the emotions of 10 million men scattered across 2 oceans. The studios used it to sell tickets and to lock actresses into contracts those women could not break. The Treasury Department used it to sell $26 billion in war bonds. The advertising industry used it to sell soap and cigarettes and cars and anything else you could put a woman's body next to. And the women? The women were the raw material. Their faces, their bodies, their smiles were fed into a machine that turned a human being into a product. And when the war was over and a younger model walked through the door, the machine threw the old one away and never looked back. Every entry on this list is an example of that single fact. The segregation, the censorship, the contracts, the bomb, the divorce courts, the pilots who died and never got the word veteran. All of it runs back to the same engine. The pinup was a tool built to move men, to move money, and to move a country. The women inside it were the last people it was ever designed to serve. So here is the answer to the question I asked at the start. Go back to number 6. Betty Grrrl. She was the face of the machine. She sold the war. She sold the bonds. She sold the tickets. And when the machine was done with her, it replaced her with Marilyn Monroe and never called again. She died at 56. Her estate was modest. Today, the poster is worth more than anything she left behind. And go back to number 10. Rita Hayworth's face on the casing of a nuclear bomb. She posed for a photograph. That photograph ended up on a weapon designed to vaporize a fleet, she found out from the papers. That is the full distance between the legend and the truth. Come back now to where we started. That photograph, Frank Powolny's camera, Betty Grrrl looking back over her shoulder in a white swimsuit, 5 million copies. But behind every one of them was a woman who was not smiling because she was happy. She was smiling because a man behind a camera told her to. And behind her were 350,000 women in uniform who never got a poster at all. And 38 pilots who got a folded flag and, for 32 years, not even the word veteran. We remembered the poster. We forgot the women. And if you want the truth behind another story the movies got wrong, the next one is already waiting for you.